Let us pray. O Almighty God, as we have come together to begin our meeting of the Assembly, we humbly beseech you to grant to all our members the light and guidance of your Holy Spirit, that we may wisely take counsel together and come to such decisions as shall promote your glory and the well-being of all our citizens in this our land, so that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be enjoyed by all people. Grant this for the sake of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Oath of allegiance of a new member. Announcements by presiding officer.
Members, I have received requests for leave of absence from today's sitting from the following members: Secretary of Sport and Youth Affairs, Mr. Joe Mupit; Secretary of Tourism, Culture and Transportation, Mrs. Nadine Stewart Phillips; Assistant Secretary in the Division of Community Development, Enterprise Development and Labor, Mr. Shomari Hector. Each request is granted. Members, I have also received a request from the Minority Leader to postpone questions on the order paper in his name to the following sitting as a means of limiting the time spent in the sitting. In keeping with best practices and in the fight against COVID-19, the request is granted. I'm on my feet, members. Members, by now we should be aware of the threat of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is a crisis situation now facing Trinidad and Tobago and the wider world. However, because of the importance of public business in this honorable House for the people of Tobago, and in accordance with Section 65(1) of the Tobago House of Assembly Act, number 40 of 1996, and 16(1) of the standing orders, I have decided not to suspend today's plenary sitting. Members, the following measures have been put in place to guarantee your safety. In keeping with established protocol, the chamber has been cleaned yesterday morning. The chamber has also been cleaned and sanitized this morning. Sinks were installed at strategic points to wash hands. There is regular sanitization of washrooms and public spaces. Safety signs are installed, and there is provision of sanitizers at the entrances to the chamber. The chamber has also been reconfigured to facilitate social distancing, and restrictions have been implemented in the public gallery. Refreshments for members are packaged instead of buffet style. Members, I wish to commend the Clerk of the Assembly, Mrs. Sherry-Ann Edwards-Louis, the administrative staff, information technology staff, and all other members of staff of the Assembly Legislature, and to thank them for their dedicated, responsible, and efficient service to ensure all protocols are in place in order to conduct this sitting today. Members, information received from the leader of Assembly Business is that he consulted with the minority side, and it is significant that both sides have agreed to today's sittings as a means to enforce the guidelines and protocols from the government of Trinidad and Tobago and the Tobago House of Assembly. Members, the motion to debate today is based on the COVID-19 pandemic, and I am satisfied that the motion is definite, the motion is urgent, and the motion is of public importance and should be addressed as a serious matter. I therefore urge members of this Honorable House and members of the public to act in a responsible manner and follow the guidelines and protocols put in place by the Government of Trinidad and Tobago and the Tobago House of Assembly to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Thank you.
Assembly bills sent back from Cabinet. Assembly laws brought back from Parliament. Petitions, papers, presentation of reports from Dispute Resolution Commission. Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Assembly on definite matters of urgent public importance. Statements by secretaries or assistant secretaries. Personal explanations. Introduction of bills. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the Assembly and moved by a secretary or assistant secretary. Public business. Executive Council business.
Secretary for Health, Wellness and Family Development.
Thank you very much, Madam Presiding Officer. I wish to thank you for the recognition and the opportunity to speak as I move this motion, standing in the name of the Secretary of Health, Wellness and Family Development. The motion reads, whereas the coronavirus, COVID-19, has been declared a global pandemic, and whereas the socio-economic impacts of COVID-19 are far-reaching, and whereas a coordinated national response has been outlined by the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to contain the spread of COVID-19 and to protect our citizens, and whereas the Tobago House of Assembly has also taken several steps and outlined the specific guidelines meant to protect the interests of Tobagonians, be it resolved that this House urged Tobagonians to adhere to the actions and the initiatives outlined by both the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and, of course, the Tobago House of Assembly. Madam Presiding Officer, I stand here today knowing the magnitude of the task in front of me and my team. But of course, I am pleased to lead a division that has demonstrated from the onset of this pandemic crisis knowledge, teamwork, and perseverance to meeting this colossal challenge. The technical, clinical, and administrative teams at the Division of Health, Wellness, and Family Development and the Tobago Regional Health Authority and many multi-sectorial agencies continue to provide human services in this public health crisis. They have been putting their shoulders to the wheel, and most importantly, they have been out there getting the job done, protecting and maintaining the health and safety of our people, our communities, and of course, our way of life. And so I am humbled by their dedication and the contributions, and I applaud their ongoing efforts to mitigate the adverse impact of the COVID-19 virus on our nation. I salute them for their selfless duty to this country, the region, and of course, the world. Madam Presiding Officer, this motion is intended to share with the wider audience the holistic approaches undertaken by the Tobago House of Assembly in light of the challenging situation which confronts us all. We have been collaborating with the Ministry of Health to ensure a consistent nationwide response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have been an integral partner on policy, clinical, and at the technical levels. In the coordinated national strategy, we have been working to ensure that we slow the spread of the virus and to maintain societal order within this catastrophe. In conjunction with the Ministry of Health, we have been communicating with the public, sharing information to update, educating and engaging persons and communities in the governmental strategy, and crucially, to urge each person's personal and social responsibility to the mammoth task at hand. Each and every one of us, has a critical role to play in flattening the curve. For the most part, residents and communities have heeded the warnings and are taking precautionary measures recommended, of course, through our daily updates and public health education endeavors. I encourage all of us, to continue in that stead and to not become complacent. Madam Presiding Officer, there are many who see personal opportunities that can be gained from this crisis. However, the reality is that this virus is coming to us at a time when oil and gas prices are relatively low, and at a time where many countries are and have been struggling with domestic and international economic decline and the resultant depletion of financial resources. Treating with this global pandemic has been exacerbated by these economic issues, making, of course, the challenge of its control and eradication even more acute. Madam Presiding Officer, many of us were living lives as usual when the initial outbreak was reported in Wuhan, China. I, for one, thought that it was just another case of SARS or possibly Ebola, and that in a short distance of time it would run its course. Never did I imagine that today we in this region would be so directly and intimately involved with the impact and response to the COVID-19 virus. These days, we are all glued to our television sets, internet, and anything which can give to us ready information on the virus and how to prevent and treat with it. We all want to forearm ourselves in the event that it comes into our own personal spaces. We have since then questioned the origins of this virus. There are many conspiracy theories out there, and though curious and eager for answers, we have all confirm our suspicions. We now accept that regardless of the origin, we have to deal with the fallout in the present. As of this morning, there were over 473,000 confirmed cases reported worldwide. Unfortunately, 21,336, or 4.5% of the infected cases, have already lost their lives to this very lethal virus. And so may their souls rest in peace. But in the midst of this pandemic, there is hope, because so far, 114,779 or almost 1/4 of the infective cases have recovered. It is difficult to find hope in these grim times, but with a personal commitment to the fight to retard and reduce the spread of COVID-19, we can mitigate its dreaded impact on ourselves, our communities, and even on our nation. On January 30th, 2020, the virus was declared a public health emergency of international concern. Currently, there are over 196 countries affected by COVID-19. And so, Madam Presiding Officer, the COVID virus is lethal. It is potent and very contagious, and it has become the latest catalyst for a multitude of economic and social problems, the effects of which are being experienced internationally and, alas, locally. Many persons have been displaced. Stock markets have been declining. Hospitals are overwhelmed, as we have seen in Italy, in the United States of America. Some countries are now basically ghost towns, as we saw in one of the places in Los Angeles and also in New York City. Schools are out. Some businesses have closed. The transportation networks halted. And the challenges have been endless, Madam Presiding Officer. So the direct impact of the COVID virus has been multisectorial and even multifold. The impact on families, education, travel, employment, and commerce have been immediate, but we continue to plan to mitigate against the imminent indirect consequences to our society, our culture, and our economic growth and potential. Madam Presiding Officer, members of this House, without a doubt, the situation concerns all of us, and I'm sure that is why this motion was brought. We don't know how long it will last, because these are relatively early days, and early estimates suggest that the financial cost of the outbreak will be at least US $2.8 billion. I am of the view that the course of the virus will be determined by the actions taken by this country, the islands, the communities, and by you, the individuals. Over the years, our governments at the Central and the Tobago House of Assembly level have done a tremendous job in building resilience and even in reducing vulnerabilities. I am pleased that we have built capacities in the business sector. We have built capacities in the government, in our contingency planning capabilities, and in ensuring that we have the necessary programs to protect and to support all of the vulnerable in our society. And so regardless of what has been said, even by those opposite, capacities have also been built in the health sector and in our clinical and technical approaches. And so it is this resiliency, Madam Presiding Officer, which is assisting us now in managing some of the debilitating effects of this virus. Apart from building resiliency, we have introduced a myriad of social economic packages and programs to protect our most vulnerable in our society. The Tobago House of Assembly, along with the central government, have thought widely and empathetically and have introduced measures that will keep our children fed and educated. Our government have collaborated with local financial institutions, housing agencies, and landlords to allay financial anxieties for homeowners. We have introduced financial stimuli to safeguard our local businessmen and our tourism industry, as well as treating with those vulnerable as I mentioned. And so we have been focused on getting the job done, Madam Presiding Officer. And so in an effort to withstand and to minimize some of the effects of COVID here in Tobago, the Division of Health, Wellness, and Family Development has taken numerous strategic and practical measures or responses at the level of the Tobago House of Assembly has focused on a coordinated local approach to treating with the virus that supplements and supports the national effort. As indicated, we have had representation at the policy level through our Deputy Chief Secretary, Assemblyman Joel Jack, who you will hear later today, and at the technical and clinical level through the County Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Tiffany Hoyt. Our aim here has been to prioritize those living within our borders and to ensure that we have a system which can encourage prevention, which can encourage detection, which can encourage reduction and control the spread and treatment of the virus. In this regard, following the template that was already established with our response to past emerging illnesses, a COVID task force was established to plan the approach that would deal with prevention, detection, and treatment. The task force has a multi-sectorial representation from various stakeholders, including the Division of Health, Wellness and Family Development, the Tobago Regional Health Authority, Education, Tobago Emergency Management Agency, Tourism. We have all worked assiduously and we have overcome the inherent logistical challenges to develop a practicable strategy that is now ready for implementation. So I want to commend the task force on a job well done to date. Madam Presiding Officer, the THA has historically and successfully responded to and managed emerging illnesses such as Ebola and, of course, H1N1. And so the task force has been using a tried and true template that we have, of course, tweaked, modified, and modernized to ensure that we develop the appropriate Tobago's island response. The plan, of course, overall objective is to ensure that we flatten the curve of this pending epidemic. Prevention, detection, reduce, retard, and control virus spread, and establish treatment pathways steeped in best practice and, of course, evidence that is practice-based. Using available technology, communication, and information sharing among the group and between the Ministry of Health is contemporaneous. We have been ensuring that we have an efficient, accurate, and an effective system. To aid prevention, what have we done? We have launched an aggressive and expansive public health education campaign by utilizing the social media, by sending pamphlets and leaflets to all households. We have been hosting regular press conferences. We have been keeping the public informed and engaged through press releases. We have hosted stakeholder educational sessions, Madam Presiding Officer. Our efforts at reducing risk factors and promoting prevention were assisted by our government's judicious decision to place travel restrictions from countries displaying a high risk of the virus. Our task force has remained very fluid in policy and decision-making. And through self-isolation and quarantine, which was first espoused, we have since determined that for the unique circumstances of Tobago, isolation and quarantine have both become necessary. And so effective as of today, we have over 65 individuals in secured facilities. Our approach was to first target the international flights landing directly in Tobago, while at the same time working with airlines arriving into Piako to assist travel history. This system, Madam Presiding Officer, signs and symptoms, which of course may or may not suggest an infection. And so all of this guarantees a fast and quick response that mitigates against the community spread of the virus. We have determined that if a person is showing signs and symptoms of possible viral infection, he or she will be swabbed and tested at CARFA. And again, for the public information, CARFA is the only recognized body in all of the region that is responsible for testing. If a person is positive, then the protocols for treating with a positive patient kicks in, and that person is placed into one of the two identified treatment pathways. If positive and well, or if positive and not well, if positive and well, the person is quarantined in Tobago, and if positive and unwell, we have been working with the Ministry of Health to transfer that individual to facilities for additional treatment. Ladies, members, Madam Presiding Officer, and members of this House, as I was saying, if the person is positive but well, the individual is accommodated at one of our facilities. And 85 to 90% of infected individuals, of course, fall within this particular category. And those persons will remain here in Tobago. If the person is positive but not well, the individual will be stabilized or stabilized and then sent to Trinidad for additional treatment. And I was making that point earlier, Madam Presiding Officer. Luckily, we have had the opportunity to test this system. Firstly, when there was a return of one of the students from China, and more recently, when one of the individuals in our quarantine facility tested positive with the virus and eventually had to be transported to Trinidad. And fortunately, I have the opportunity to report to the public and to this House that our system has been working beautifully. Our CMOH, Dr. Hoyt, has led the task force on Tobago's response, which includes surveillance by staff, office staff at all points of entry in Tobago, screening all persons who are considered high risk because they have had a history of recent foreign travel. For the health, delivery, and treatment aspects of Tobago's response, the CMOH and the task force is ably assisted by the TRHA hospital team, by the acting medical chief of staff, Dr. Victor Wheeler, who is also supported by our SMOs in accident and emergency and the general manager primary care. Dr. Wheeler and the healthcare delivery team has ensured hospital preparedness by having meetings with staff of the accident and emergency department, identifying an isolation area in accident and emergency for persons who might be positive or suspected patient. We have outfitted these isolation areas as required. The team of doctors led by Dr. Wheeler have ensured that the negative pressure systems are working, that the appropriate personal protective equipment, general meetings with all managers in the department to constantly update and to inform and to allay any fears that may exist amongst the staff, Madam Presiding Officer. And so the process continues. They have been ensuring that there is training. They have been ensuring that there are monthly disaster meetings. They have been ensuring that the plan rolls out in keeping with all of the dictates of the COVID-19 task force. Madam Presiding Officer, in addition, the Division of Health, Wellness, and Family Development has forged international partnerships with international agencies. And there were several public education meetings chaired by Dr. Hines of PAHO and facilitated, of course, by the division. And those meetings were held over a particular period of time. And so all of this means that the Tobago House of Assembly, that we are ready and able to contain risk by putting in place early identification of persons at risk of detection and quarantining before there is an opportunity to spread that infection. And so those suspected persons that require admission to the hospital for medical assessment and swabbing would be looked at by all the healthcare officers, of course, using their personal, their PPEs to safeguard themselves. COVID patients are will be well isolated at our isolation facility, and they would, of course, be monitored by a team of nursing staff for any signs or symptoms. And so if any of their conditions worsen, they, of course, will be treated accordingly. Madam Presiding Officer, through my presentation, I have clearly demonstrated that we, the policymakers, the clinicians, and the technicians, have created a framework that could successfully reduce, retard, and control the viral spread and provide the best care and intervention for those that may succumb the harsh realities of this virus. But our plan is, of course, only as good as the persons who are willing to work with us. All these good plans can easily come to naught if just one person, only one, decides to stray from the established protocol. One person deviating from our public health advice and precautions could escalate this crisis and put everything that we have all worked for in the present and the past at risk. And so this is why this motion is placed on the table, to encourage the participation of all persons, to highlight the responses of the governments, both at the central level and, of course, the Tobago House of Assembly to date, but most importantly, to ensure that we all lead by example and promulgate the Tobago's response without false pride, without prejudice, without preference, or even without politics. This is not the time to be scoring quick points on the fates of our people, our nation, and even our future. The Division of Health, Wellness, and Family Development is inviting all suggestions for solutions and offer of pertinent skills and knowledge to surviving this pandemic with minimal loss to life and the way of life. We have done a lot, but we need everyone's cooperation in taking the Tobago's response even further. Each and everyone here, each and everyone listening via the internet or radio or television is a leader in his or her own right with the potential to influence someone who can dictate the success or failure of Tobago's response. And so I urge the following: a spirit of volunteerism amongst professionals who want to contribute to a formal response to this pandemic, among communities who can help their neighbors, among church and community leaders who can highlight and address health, social, economic, and financial gaps within our systems that need addressing. Individual leadership Let us each embrace the opportunity to be the leader and influence at least one person to the benefit of us all. Personal responsibility. Let us each take responsibility to secure lives, to secure communities, to secure spaces. Community responsibility. Let us each look out for neighbors and recognize that our actions and inactions affect them. And then people first, everything else last. Let's promulgate together this plan for the greater good of all. This is uncharted territory, but we can only get through this together. If you have a solution, a suggestion, a recommendation, do not let the politics of old grudges or personalities deter you from sharing an idea. And I promise that we at this division are open to suggestions and assistance going forward. Madam Presiding Officer, I wish to once again thank the team in the Division of Health, Wellness, and Family Development for their commitment to the process. I wish to thank the nurses, the doctors, for their service, putting their shoulders to the wheel. I wish to thank all those who would have assisted in the formation of the COVID task force before. The former Secretary of Health and Wellness and Family Development, Dr. Agatha Carrington, the Chief Secretary who would have chaired the COVID task force meetings when the Secretary would have left the division.
I wish 10 more minutes.
I wish to thank each and every one of them for that contribution. But most importantly, I want to urge all of us, I want to urge everyone, I want to urge the public that we have to do our part. We have to play our role in getting through this thing together. And I want to take this opportunity to remind everyone, wash your hands. Practice social distancing as we are doing here. Don't travel unless you must. This thing, this pandemic, this virus that we face today calls for your involvement. It calls for your attention and action. In closing, I wish to pay tribute to the community of Shouter Baptist for the contributions that they have made not only to building Tobago, but to building Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the region and, of course, the world. Madam Presiding Officer, I thank you for this opportunity to present this motion, and I take my seat.
Minority Councillor.
Good afternoon, Madam Presiding Officer. Good afternoon to the members sitting here, and good afternoon to those who are viewing on the various social media platforms, on the radio, and on television. First, Madam Presiding Officer, please allow me to extend greetings to the Spiritual Baptist community ahead of the official celebration, or the official liberation holiday on Monday. We know that it is a trying time for all of us, and particularly members of that community who look forward to being able to celebrate but can't because of COVID-19. Madam Presiding Officer, please allow me to indicate, unfortunately, that I am a tad, no, I'm a little bit more than a tad, disappointed that we are choosing to not stay in our safe spaces at home to come to debate a motion that in my mind and in the mind of many others is quite vague and that could have been used to do other more critical and timely debates. And let me give an example. Because, Madam Presiding Officer, we are working in a situation where we have an evolving crisis. Tobago could have been debating right now, since we had just decided to cancel Tobago Jazz Festival, to possibly use the funding from Jazz Festival to fund some of the things that we are doing or that we need to do. That is something that we could have specifically identified as we are debating. Let me raise a couple points, Madam Presiding Officer. First, and I would like to do this because I see that we continue to use words interchangeably, and we continue to misunderstand a couple concepts. So I'm going to take just a little bit of time to clear up a couple things. First, the virus is called the Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Corona 2 virus, short SARS-CoV-2. It is part of a larger body of coronaviruses, and this looks very closely like the SARS that we experienced several years ago that, unfortunately, or fortunately for us, was not as great as this is. The actual name of the disease, we've been calling it short, COVID-19 for short, Coronavirus Disease 2019. There's also another thing that we need to be clear about, and it's the term isolation versus quarantine. Yes, both words mean that we separate people, but we isolate people who are sick. So as long as we've identified that you are sick, that you have signs and symptoms, that you've been tested and you are a confirmed case, we isolate you. But if we understand or if we think that you have been exposed but you are well, you are quarantined. And as we've been doing in Trinidad and Tobago, there are two ways to quarantine people who have been exposed but have not shown signs that they are sick. One is at the state-sponsored institutions, which we have in Trinidad and we also have in Tobago. But the other is in what we call self-quarantining, which is us basically saying to folks, you have been exposed, but I need you to stay home, to not mingle, to keep yourself away from even members of your families for at least 14 days, because that is the time it takes, on average, to start showing signs and symptoms after you have been exposed. Madam Presiding Officer, there are two other words that I would just like to clear up for the viewing public, and it relates to epidemic and pandemic. An epidemic is when you have an increase in the number of cases of anything. In a situation like us, from the time we had a single case in Trinidad and Tobago, that was an epidemic because we did not have cases before. And pandemic means we have cases in almost in every region and almost every country of the world. So we are experiencing a pandemic. We can't start it, we can't, it is what it is, a pandemic. Madam Presiding Officer, one of the things that I think we need to do in Tobago is, instead of really just piggybacking on what is done in Trinidad, we need to take this opportunity to critically figure out for ourselves here whether we can implement a comprehensive response to COVID-19. And that comprehensive response, Madam Presiding Officer, includes doing a lot of the public education and so forth. It also includes testing and the associated quarantining if we are not testing yet, or contact tracing after we have determined that you have a case. It also includes treatment. It also includes psychosocial support for all of us. And it includes the economic recovery that would be necessary to combat what this disease has done. I will focus on 3 of those: testing, treatment, and psychosocial support. Madam Presiding Officer, the testing of individuals who we suspect to have COVID-19, the protocols as it relates to testing continue to change. It is a moving target as we learn more about what's happening. We change who gets tested, when they get tested, and so forth. We have an opportunity now, Madam Presiding Officer, though, because Tobago is still several weeks behind the rest of the world, and Trinidad and Tobago is still several weeks behind many other countries as it relates to the evolution of this pandemic. We have an opportunity now to use this time, Madam Presiding Officer, to use the lag time that we have, to use the 2 or 3 weeks ahead of what happens everywhere else to ensure that we are properly prepared. Madam Presiding Officer, there are studies coming out of China that suggest that up to 60% of the people who have COVID-19 or who have been infected with SARS-CoV-2 are asymptomatic, meaning they do not show the regular signs and symptoms, or have very mild signs and symptoms. In some of these studies, we see where 18%, 31% if you look at what is happening and what happened on the Diamond Princess cruise, those people who they tested, up to 31% of those people did not have any signs and symptoms at all, but when they tested them, they were positive for SARS-CoV-2, which means that there are a large proportion of people in the world who have the virus inside of them, who is replicating the virus inside of them, who can then transmit the virus to other people who are not showing signs and symptoms. In some instances, in Iceland, for example, where they have been doing mass testing, in Iceland they have not been following the WHO and those recommendations in terms of who to test. In Iceland, they have been mass testing, and they've been doing surveillance testing in essence. What they have been picking up is that about 50% of the people who were tested positive did not have signs and symptoms. Now, that is critical, and we need to pay very special attention to that fact now that we are a couple weeks ahead of the rest of the world. Madam Presiding Officer, the New England Journal of Medicine reported that there have been several studies where they've taken the swabs of the throats of these people who do not have the signs and symptoms, and they recognize that they have very high viral load still. So even though they are not coughing or they are not sneezing or they are not doing any of those things, they still have very high viral loads, which means they can then transmit it. And they are recognizing from doing very, very careful contact tracing, Madam Presiding Officer, that those are some of the people who actually have been infecting a large proportion of those who get infected, because when they do the contact tracing, some of these people who have gotten infected, we can't figure out where they got the infection from because they did not come into contact with people who were confirmed. Because of that, Madam Presiding Officer, I would strongly recommend here in Tobago that we, in the first instance, do testing of everyone who has flu-like symptoms. And I am clear when I said flu-like symptoms and not necessarily COVID-19 symptoms, because those who have the flu-like symptoms, some of them are very, very mild, and those are the ones who the rest of the world has been showing they've been missing because they did not meet the standard protocol for being tested. I would recommend, Madam Presiding Officer, that after doing that first step of testing folks with flu-like symptoms, that we go out and do surveillance testing. Tobago, Madam Presiding Officer, is 60,000 people. We have the benefit of having a pretty small population here. And because we have a very small population, we have an opportunity to arrest this before it gets out of hand. Madam Presiding Officer, if we use a very conservative testing regimen where we do surveillance testing of 1 in every 200 people, that is only, what, 350 tests. In the grand scheme of things, 300 tests in Tobago to pick up and ensure that we are infected or not infected is not a tall order. And it is worth taking time, effort, and resources to put it into our system to ensure that we can do something like that. Because the WHO, yesterday I think, the Director General basically warned countries that are being too relaxed, that are not learning from the examples of the countries that are way ahead. We have an opportunity, Madam Presiding Officer, to heed that warning. How would we do that, Madam Presiding Officer? I heard, I think, I can't remember the date of that press briefing, because the government has been doing briefings every day. I can't remember what day this was particularly announced. Is that even though we have CARFA is our only authorized testing site in Trinidad and Tobago and for most of the Caribbean, I heard the Minister for Health boasting about us getting additional testing machines, additional lab equipment, and that they were going to roll out and certify or accredit testing to happen at Eric Williams Medical Complex and at the Trinidad Public Health Lab. And when I was counting the number of additional machines that he was talking about and the number of additional sites that he was talking about, we have an opportunity here in Tobago, Madam Presiding Officer, for one of those extra machines, because I think he spoke about three additional sets coming in, to having one of those in Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, I keep hearing people saying that we don't have people who know how to do the test. Before this happened, we did not have people who knew how to do the test. That is why PAHO, that is why WHO, that is why CARFA, that is why all of those agencies have been providing technical assistance to Trinidad and Tobago to bring our lab techs up to point where they can do it. As a matter of fact, Madam Presiding Officer, I think, if I am not mistaken, I heard the Minister for Health also state that somebody else was coming in from Miami to do the training with these additional machines that were coming in, and he was going to ask the Minister for National Security to allow this foreigner to come in because he was going to come in using a private jet and he was so happy and all of that was going to happen. So the same way he can come in and come to Trinidad, Madam Presiding Officer, he can come in and come to Tobago. We have a host of lab technicians, many currently working, many who have graduated and are not yet working. So if the issue is we need more people to take up the load, there are people who have the basic training, who have level 1 and level 2 lab tech training in Tobago, who just need to be additionally trained in this specific situation. We can do that, Madam Presiding Officer. Treatment is the other thing I want to chat about. We currently have, Madam Presiding Officer, a plan that says if you need treatment, meaning if you have COVID-19 and you are one of the 20% or so who need to be hospitalized, that you will then be taken to Trinidad. I understand that we are going via Coast Guard. That is plan A, Madam Presiding Officer. We are in an opportunity, we are in a position, Madam Presiding Officer, to ensure that we start plan B, plan C, and plan D are rolling, because the way this thing evolves, it evolves so quickly that we may need to look at a plan B. What if, Madam Presiding Officer, I got up this morning, or I think after I had gotten dressed, I saw that the entire Aruca police station had to be shut down because a police officer was out of the country, came back here. What if, Madam Presiding Officer, and this probably means to a bank, to a casino, to all of these places that he visited, we have a real possibility, Madam Presiding Officer, of suddenly having so many cases in Trinidad that need hospitalization, that the beds at Couva, Cora, Arima, and even Napa could be filled. And we, Madam Presiding Officer, here in Tobago, need to determine right now what our plan B will be if and when that happens. We can't start thinking about it when it happens. By then, Madam Presiding Officer, it will be too late. Madam Presiding Officer, what we are recommending is to possibly designate one of the health centers that are underutilized, because we have 20-something health facilities, 60,000 people, 116 square miles. On any average day, most of our health centers are not fully used. They are not halfway used. They are not quarter way used. We could think through which of these may be the best to designate as a COVID-19 treatment center. The same way in Trinidad, they could identify that they can go into Napa to have Napa be a COVID-19 treatment center. We could identify a space in Tobago. One of these health centers may be Mariah. Mariah is coming on stream soon, I understand. Maybe we... 10 minutes more. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Maybe we can designate Mariah, speed up the last couple, whatever work is happening now, because I understand it's coming on stream from next month. It's being handed over next month. Speed that up so that we can have a designated space in Tobago for treatment, Madam Presiding Officer. Because what is necessary is we need to be able to have ventilator services for patients. That is what is necessary, Madam Presiding Officer. I understand, and please correct me if I am wrong, that we do have 6 or so ventilators in Tobago. I understand that 1 is assigned to A&E, 1 to the theater, 2 somewhere else in the wards, and 2 that are on reserve, which is standard protocol. Just in case one goes down with a patient, we have another one to pull and use immediately. Madam Presiding Officer, I also heard on the 23rd of March, the Minister of Health boasting about having some 15 ventilators coming from somewhere, 10 coming from somewhere else, another 50 coming from somewhere else. That is 75 right there coming into Trinidad. And then he also spoke about another 10, another 50 to 100 that are being donated from somewhere else. These are over 100 ventilators that are coming into Trinidad and Tobago. And I am suggesting that as a plan B, we negotiate to have at least 10 of those, Madam Presiding Officer, come to Tobago so that we can treat with our patients here. As a matter of fact, we need a portable one right now, because if, heaven forbids, a patient that is going from Tobago to Trinidad via Coast Guard needs ventilator servicing while on the way, I am not sure that we have a portable one to go with. If we do, thank God. If not, we need to fix that right now. Madam Presiding Officer, I have also heard several people talk about the fact that we have enough PPEs. We have enough PPEs. And in the same breath that we talk about having enough PPEs, I have health professionals, I have first responders messaging me and telling me they don't have PPEs. Now, what may be happening may be that they are uncomfortable with what is required of them now, and they need to feel more comfortable with the processes so that they can do their work. Now, that leads me to the third point, which is the psychosocial support that we need of everyone on the island, starting with our health professionals. If you live on this island, you know that we have come out of a situation where our health professionals have been extremely demotivated. That is a fact. So we know that we have to do all that we can to also then push them into this situation where they are seeing that their counterparts in the US, when they get sick, they get COVID-19 severest compared to other people. Studies are showing that. So, Madam Presiding Officer, maybe we need to spend a little more time ensuring that these healthcare workers are communicated with, because it may really just be a matter of communication. The PPEs are probably coming, but they don't know. So it's a matter of communication maybe. We also need to ensure that those people, those healthcare workers that we care for and we love so much, really have other mental health services. Debriefing is absolutely necessary, because this is going to, I know that some of them have already gotten very tired. Just a regular case load makes you tired. And going into this, we need to prepare for how they will get tired, how we will prop them up mentally to provide this service. Madam Presiding Officer, before I take my seat, I would also like to ensure that we do all that we can, particularly since the Secretary with responsibility for health, family development, and wellness and family development also is responsible for social support, that we have very clear social support, clear counseling opportunities for members of the public. People are afraid. People are scared. This is something that we have never experienced before, and we need to have that kind of support. We also, very quickly, Madam Presiding Officer, need to ensure that we are able to respond, because if we are telling people to do social distancing and stay home, we need to be prepared for the domestic violence issues that may come up as a result of that. Madam Presiding Officer, as I said, we have an opportunity now, because we are several weeks ahead of this, to do our plan B, C, and D, and take the time to implement our plan B, C, and D right now. Because if we wait until we need plan B, C, and D to start thinking and start implementing it, we will be too late. I would end by encouraging all of us to keep washing our hands, social distancing. If you are sick, stay home and follow the guidelines. Those who are self-quarantining, please, for the love of all that is holy, follow the guidelines of self-quarantining, because this is how we would be able to be ahead of COVID-19. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Deputy Chief Secretary and Secretary for Finance and Economy.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. You caught me by surprise. But nonetheless, as the Boy Scouts say, it's always good to be ready. But Madam Presiding Officer, thank you for the opportunity to join the debate at this time on this important motion which seeks to address the issues that I believe is of critical importance to the people of Tobago. But Madam Presiding Officer, before I get into the details of my presentation, let me take the opportunity to extend a very warm welcome to the mover of this motion, Councillor Tracy Davidson Celestine, Secretary for Health, Wellness and Family Services. Let me welcome her back to this Honorable House and August Chamber. Also to thank her for tabling this important motion for and on behalf of the people of Tobago. And let me also congratulate Madam Presiding Officer, and as well congratulate in advance my colleagues on this side of the horseshoe. And though I have not heard the members opposite stand in support of the motion, and should they do so, let me congratulate them in advance. And if they don't, I will treat them accordingly later in my presentation. But in anticipation of their support, let me thank them as well. But Madam Presiding Officer, let me say that what this motion seeks to do is to solicit the support of this House for the stimulus package and the important direct health and other social initiatives that are being implemented both by the central government and the Tobago House of Assembly to mitigate the harmful effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it is in this specific context that today's motion is indeed important. And, the member opposite, who is a health professional, and in her contribution, she wanted to hear an exhaustive list of what has been done and so on. But everything must be taken into context, and what we have been doing is to continue to report to the people of Tobago and to the people of Trinidad and Tobago with respect to all the various initiatives by the Assembly. And her suggestions are welcome, and the Secretary of Health will respond in due course when she wraps up, because some of the issues that she raised are already in train, have already been announced, and are definitely under consideration. And the question has to be asked that while we are constrained by the protocols to avoid social distancing and to implement the safe practices to prevent the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, I believe that it is important for us to come here collectively as a body, as the Assembly, and signal to the people of Tobago that we are serious about their business. And as the member opposite indicated, that he was being magnanimous, that the members opposite will also show magnanimity and to come out at the onset and support the motion while also proffering their recommendation. But, Madam Presiding Officer, to say that we are living in unprecedented times will be an understatement. We are all aware of the fact that the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, as is the acronym which originated in Wuhan, China in December of 2019, is impacting countries globally. Global supply chains have been disrupted as manufacturing factories all over the world have either stopped production or reduced their levels of production. At the same time, in a corresponding manner, the energy sector globally has witnessed significant disruptions as oil prices have plummeted. This is attributable to the drastic fall in demand for oil by China, one of the largest importers of oil, and reduced travel worldwide as people everywhere are urged to stay at home. In addition, the current oil price war between Russia and Saudi Arabia has exacerbated the situation on the supply side, as Saudi Arabia has significantly increased production. Stock markets around the world have declined precipitously and displayed tremendous volatility as investors struggle to make sense of the events and protect the value of their investments. Madam Presiding Officer, countries around the world are implementing a range of monetary and fiscal measures of unprecedented scale to protect their economies and their citizens from the disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. For instance, the United States of America, the U.S. Federal Reserve has taken a series of measures to provide monetary stimulus, some of which included the reducing of the Fed funds rate by 0.5%, increasing reverse repo operations to add liquidity to the banking system, reducing interest rates to a range between 0.00% and minus 0.25%, and relaunching the primary dealer credit facility, a tool used in the Great Recession era. With respect to its fiscal measures, the United States of America has invested in a three-phase stimulus package. Phase one was used to fund efforts to fight the pandemic head-on, such as the funding of research on vaccine and allocating money to state, local government, and overseas entities to stop the spread of the virus. Phase two focused on free virus testing, expanded employment benefits, and additional funds for Medicaid, among other things. Madam Presiding Officer, it was just last night that the U.S. Senate passed a U.S. $2 trillion aid package of fiscal measures to fund tax credits for some families and loans and loan guarantees to small businesses, passenger airline and cargo airlines, and other eligible businesses, among other things. Madam Presiding Officer, the Bank of England as well has taken a monetary policy stance to lower interest rates, lower capital requirements for UK banks, and to purchase UK government bonds and corporate bonds in a response to COVID-19. Additionally, on the fiscal side, the UK Minister of Finance announced a fiscal stimulus package which would be used for tax cuts, cash grants to small businesses, sick pay for persons who need to isolate, expanded access to government benefits for the self-employed and unemployed, loan guarantees, and business tax cuts, among other things. Madam Presiding Officer, in China, where this virus originated, and China is yet to implement a massive fiscal stimulus as it did previous years ago to combat the global financial crisis and to slow growth. The People's Bank of China has implemented several monetary policy measures, which include expanding the reverse repo rate operations and as well reducing the one-year medium-term lending facility, which is the rate at which the PBOC lends to banks. Madam Presiding Officer, the COVID-19 pandemic has serious social and economic implications for us here in Trinidad and Tobago. Among the economic implications of the COVID-19 pandemic on Trinidad and Tobago are the following. GDP levels are expected to be negatively impacted, arising from declining oil and gas prices, reductions in productivity related to social distances, and declines in critical sectors such as tourism and entertainment, as well as small business sectors. Given modest national growth rates over the past few years, we can see long-term implications for unemployment level and overall economic activity. Falling oil and gas prices related to the reduced global travel, reduced demand from China, and the current oil war between Saudi Arabia and Russia, as I previously mentioned. This is expected to lead to a fall in government revenues and a larger fiscal deficit. Notably, the national budget for 2020 was predicated on oil and gas prices of $60 per barrel and a gas price of US $3 per MMBTU. And we will recall, Madam Presiding Officer, that the Minister of Finance, in a subsequent announcement, revised these figures downwards. We can also anticipate, Madam Presiding Officer, a reduction in foreign exchange earnings as a direct result of lower energy prices. We can also expect in the coming year that the performance of the Trinidad and Tobago Heritage and Stabilization Fund is also likely to be negatively impacted by the performance of the International Stock Exchange. Madam Presiding Officer, the central government and the Tobago House of Assembly, both working together and also being mindful of the negative consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic on Trinidad and Tobago, we continue to work tirelessly to implement measures to minimize the harmful effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the country. As was previously stated by Councillor Tracy Davidson Celestine, that I was appointed as a member of a Cabinet Subcommittee on Finance, and this committee was mandated to devise measures to mitigate the negative effects and to come up with a strategy that, and that report was forwarded to the Prime Minister, and the Minister of Finance outlined several of these measures to the country. I'm pleased to inform this House that the committee held several meetings with various stakeholders, and we came up with a series of measures to assist the country in coping with the negative effects of the pandemic using the two levers available to us of fiscal and monetary policy. Our primary objectives at the time were to ensure business continuity and to preserve jobs. Madam Presiding Officer, arising out of the work of the National Economic Subcommittee, we compiled a host of economic policy measures, all aimed at mitigating some of the harmful effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago reduced the reserve requirements ratio for commercial banks from 17% to 14% in order to increase liquidity in the banking system. The central bank also reduced the repo rate by 150 basis points from 5% to 3.5%. And this measure, I'm pleased to announce as well, Madam Presiding Officer, has prompted a reduction in the prime lending rate of 1.5 percentage points to 7.75% by some of our local banks. It is expected that this initiative, together with the adjustment to the reserve requirement ratio, will inject an additional $2.6 billion in increased liquidity into the commercial banking system. The government also proposes to increase the allocation of foreign exchange into the system using the Exim Bank and other commercial banks and other suitable institutions. Madam Presiding Officer, in the first instance, under this initiative, suppliers of essential goods, food, and pharmaceuticals will be the main focus. And I have as well recommended and intervened and insisted that Tobago entrepreneurs who are in need of Forex, that we should get our fair share as well, Madam Presiding Officer. In addition, the government has agreed to provide businesses with much needed cash flow by accelerating the payment of a substantial portion of outstanding VAT refunds, income tax refunds, and overdue payables owed to suppliers and contractors. The government also outlined as part of the stimulus package that it will provide approximately $50 million as part of a grant facility to Tobago hoteliers to facilitate the upgrading of their facilities during this slow period in preparation for future businesses. The government will also institute a liquidity support program by providing $100 million to the credit union movement in order to allow them to provide loans to their members at favorable interest rates with a long repayment period beginning after the situation normalizes. Madam Presiding Officer, the banking sector has also been asked in some cases, and some of them have already begun, providing a range of support measures to individuals and businesses within Trinidad and Tobago. Commercial banks will ask to reduce their prime lending rate, and as I mentioned before, it's 7.75, but the targeted rate that we're looking at is 6%, and this is an attempt to reduce the spread between the lending rate and the deposit rate. Additionally, Madam Presiding Officer, commercial banks have agreed to provide a moratorium or skipper payments, and the details will vary between banks. But I want to encourage persons that if they are not in need of this facility, not to utilize it, because you're not canceling out your payment. The bank is not having a loan forgiveness for 2 or 3 months. What the bank is saying is that they will defer the payment. You are pushing their obligation down the road for 2 or 3 months. And what that does, Madam Presiding Officer, for the persons in need, they will have those payment funds in hand to ensure that they have their basic needs, their food and pharmaceuticals during this period. Interest rates on credit cards will be reduced by amounts ranging from 10% to 17%, and it varies across banks as well. The government has also implemented an initiative as well with our support to help a number of persons who are affected through mortgage and housing companies and other money lenders, including the Trinidad and Tobago Mortgage Finance Company and the Home Mortgage Banks. And they are already on board, and as well as persons who are in the HDC facilities. So we also have a deferral of mortgage payments and rental payments for those persons who are applicable. and hire purchase firms such as Island Finance and Unicomma, who finance a lot of household purchases. They are also on board, and we are asking them as well to reduce their interest rates and to provide appropriate moratoriums on installment payments and as well on hire purchase agreements. And these entities, let me thank them, they have come out in full support of this initiative as well, Madam Presiding Officer. And let me say at the onset, during the meeting, Madam Presiding Officer, and what made it so easy to implement a number of these measures is that at the onset, we had the support of the two major chambers in the country, the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce and the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association. Also, Madam Presiding Officer, another initiative that will provide direct support to the SME sector in Tobago will be an additional injection of $5 million through the Business Development Unit and the Enterprise Assistance Fund. And this will go directly to provide the necessary support and to cushion some of the negative effects and the economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. And let me say, Madam Presiding Officer, and let me thank the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance that I'm proud to have been afforded the opportunity to be part of the team to advance a number of measures of and before the people of Tobago and the Tobago House of Assembly. But Madam Presiding Officer, notwithstanding the economic policy initiatives that were implemented by the government, there's likely to be some unintended adverse social impact on the people of Tobago because of COVID-19. And as the mover of the motion would have indicated, both the government and the Tobago House of Assembly, we are very sensitive to these issues, and we have introduced a number of social support policy measures to provide an additional layer of financial support for citizens, in particular the vulnerable and the less fortunate members of society. And I would leave those issues for my colleague, Assemblyman Ansel Dennis, to treat with and focus primarily on the economic issues. But Madam Presiding Officer, the Tobago...
10 more minutes.
10 more minutes?
More.
Thank you. Madam Presiding Officer, the Tobago House of Assembly, we are mindful of the fact that in the view of the underlying structure of the Tobago economy, there are significant economic and social implications for Tobago emanating from COVID-19. Tobago is a small open economy which is largely dependent on the tourism sector and government expenditure. Overall, we anticipate that there will be a decline in the island's GDP directly related to a reduction in the production as a result of the measures that are in effect for social distancing, as well as some challenges that there are some challenges in some sectors, such as the tourism sector. What we anticipate, Madam Presiding Officer, there's likely to be an increase in unemployment, particularly in the tourism sector and other sectors that support or their businesses are directly related to the tourism industry, such as restaurants, bars, dive shops, tour operators, the taxi drivers, and a wide range of persons who are also self-employed will be directly impacted by the economic fallout of COVID-19. Based on preliminary estimates from the Tourism Agency, it was estimated that Tobago would lose approximately US $4.6 million or $31 million in revenue for stayover arrivals from February and March as a result of COVID-19. The island is expected to lose a further $8 million US or $56 million for the second quarter of 2020, that is from April to June. And as a result, the total losses for the period is estimated at $87.3 million, or roughly $88 million. Additionally, with the loss of our cruise passenger arrivals and with the cancellation of the cruise season, this resulted in the cancellation of 8 scheduled cruise ships, and they were unable to dock, and the anticipated fallout from that is approximately $1.5 million, or 227 US dollars. So taken together, Madam Presiding Officer, we are looking at a direct economic impact to the tourism sector of approximately $88 million. In total, 8,000 workers were either fully engaged in the accommodation sector or fully engaged in ancillary services. And from a survey of our business establishments, we are saying that at least 6,000 persons will be displaced as a result of the decline in tourist arrivals. What we are also estimating and working on is that these losses can increase further should the period of the pandemic become protracted. Madam Presiding Officer, given the high dependence of the Tobago House of Assembly, the high dependence of many Tobago small businesses on the Assembly, as well as the fact that many of them operate in the tourism sector, either guest houses, restaurants, and other business operations, we are aware that a large number of small businesses will be negatively impacted. Many of our small businesses, they face significant challenge in terms of accessing credit, obtaining raw material, and as well maintaining their distribution and retail channels throughout these challenges. Madam Presiding Officer, we have come up and not by ourselves in the Tobago context, but I'm pleased to announce that I met with several of the stakeholders in the business community, the Tobago chapter of the Tobago Industry of Commerce, the tourism president, and other stakeholders, and we met and we devised a number of plans to treat with these issues. Additionally, I met with the Customs Department to facilitate the free processing of goods coming into Tobago. I met with the trade union movement, supermarket owners, small business owners, and a number of measures that we can implement to mitigate some of the challenges, specifically for Tobago. And all these ideas were collated and submitted to the Executive Council for consideration, even as the Executive Council also appointed a subcommittee to craft and devise our own proposals and to submit before the Executive Council for consideration. Madam Presiding Officer, some of these measures include a recalibration of our fiscal priorities as we undertake ongoing scenario planning and forecasting of the Assembly's revenue and expenditure, and the division will continue to review what is happening regionally, internationally, and locally to ensure that we continue to manage the economic fallout and that we instill and develop the necessary economic resilience and that we're able to bounce back right after this pandemic is over. Secondly, we have approved the deferral of loan payments for BDU clients for a period of 6 months in the first instance, with a review of this measure in early June. We have also deferred the rental fees for tenants of properties and assets managed by the Assembly, including the Cove Eco Industrial and Business Park, the Milford Road Esplanade, the micro centers and beach facilities. We have also expanded and increased the ceilings on the Enterprise Assistance Fund and Enterprise Assistance Grant Program. The grant is now increased from $25,000 to $50,000, and the loan ceiling is now increased from $250,000 to $500,000 to assist the SME sector to receive the necessary injection of funds to tide them over during this pandemic. Madam Presiding Officer, we have also expanded the food card program with the acquisition of additional 5,000 cards in the first instance. We are also enhancing our social safety net support program, which is important for us to ensure that the vulnerable in our society is able to cope with the impact of COVID. We are also restructuring, working with the Ministry of Finance and Tourism, the government's loan guarantee program to improve access, and we're also seeking to expand the tourism accommodation upgrade program. We're looking to restructure the loan guarantee program so that we can provide the necessary support, working capital support for our stakeholders in the tourism sector during this time. We'll be collaborating with the government to implement in a very timely manner the tourism loan grant facility. And in my meeting with the credit union movements in Tobago, Madam Presiding Officer, they are excited about the inclusion of Tobago's credit unions in the government's liquidity support program, and they have also agreed to the implementation of a skipper payment loan deferral initiative for members of their credit union society. In the Division of Finance and Economy, we'll continue to intensify our price monitoring by the Department of Consumer Affairs as they go out weekly to provide the necessary support and effective monitoring to avoid price gouging. Now, Madam Presiding Officer, we have seen the reports coming on social media, and let me report to this House that the team, that they have gone to the identified supermarket and drugstore, and a report will be submitted soon. Additionally, as an Assembly and an Executive Council, we are funding, I should say, the estimated cost to treat with COVID-19 is $45 million, and we will seek the necessary funding to cover this initiative. We will expedite payments to our contractors, suppliers to liquidate outstanding debts across divisions of the Assembly. Let me ask my colleague, before you have to stand up, Madam Presiding Officer, just to give me a few minutes, just to outline a couple of the economic measures. Madam Presiding Officer, you signal to me a minute, I had a minute more, so before my time runs out, I'm asking my colleague to give me a few more minutes of additional time.
I'm sorry, the speaking time is up.
Right, so I'm asking my colleague to give me an additional.
The speaking time is up.
Right, so I should wrap up.
Member,
So is it part of the, Madam Presiding Officer, my apologies, part of the new, okay, yes.
Madam Presiding Officer, I beg to move that the speaking time of the member be extended by a further 10 minutes.
members, the question is that the speaking time of the member be extended by a further 10 minutes. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any against? I think the ayes have it. The speaking time of the member is extended by 10 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer, and I wouldn't need all of the 10 minutes, just 2 minutes, if so much. Additionally, Madam Presiding Officer, I spoke about the payment to contractors and suppliers to liquidate outstanding debts of the Assembly, and we're working to put money and to improve the cash flow of our Tobago businesses. We'll be also increasing the access of foreign exchange to the business community in Tobago, and this was agreed to by the Minister of Finance. We're also providing supply chain support to minimize inventory shortages across the island through providing warehousing facilitation at Tikoswaf, and we have at least 10,000 square feet of dry storage space and 70,000 cubic feet of cold storage space, and this will be provided free of charge to the business community. And we are going to seek to enhance our food security through the distribution of seeds, seedlings, and other planting materials to farmers and other households that they can increase the output in the first instance of short-term crops. And we are working directly with the Tobago Regional Health Authority to ensure that they are sufficiently resourced and that there's no shortages in terms of ventilators and other equipment, much needed equipment. And Madam Presiding Officer, I close on this note. It was today that I received a call from a businessman, and he pledged his support to the Tobago House of Assembly, and he was encouraged by what we are doing. And he said he is ready to provide extended credit to the Tobago House of Assembly to ensure that we have all the goods and supplies on hand, because he supplies one of his customers is the TRHA. And I asked him to put that in writing so that I could forward that to the Minister, to the Secretary of Health and the Chief Secretary, because this is the signal that we have been getting from persons in the business community, and I want to thank them for being innovative and resilient in this trying time. And Madam Presiding Officer, I want to echo the words of the Prime Minister when he said that we are all in this together. The virus does not discriminate. The virus has no political allegiance. The virus is a threat to all of us. So again, I urge members opposite to be responsible in their actions, to be understanding, and don't contribute to the panic amongst our citizens. This virus requires us to be serious and focused at this time and to ensure that all citizens are protected. These times call for sober leadership, and I wish to compliment the central government for their tremendous leadership in these times as we continue to support them in their efforts. I also want to congratulate the Chief Secretary and the Secretary of Health, and since assuming office, she has hit the ground running. And Madam Presiding Officer, therefore, I am happy to lend my voice and my support to this debate and to the motion presented in her name. I thank you.
Member for Palliative Lands for Miss Bayside.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Thank you for this opportunity to contribute to this debate. Let me also join my colleague on the other side who spoke before me in welcoming yet again to this House the Councillor and the Secretary for Health. I did so in person at the last sitting. I did so via a press conference, and I'm doing so again. It is always good when we find people who are willing to give of their time and their energies to public service. Very often, public service is a thankless job, and so we must take the time out ever so often to thank those in public service for accepting the call to join in the service. The motion asks for us to urge Tobagonians adhere to the actions and initiatives outlined by the government of Trinidad, of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and the Tobago House of Assembly. I want to start by positing that throughout history, nothing has killed more human beings than infectious diseases. That's actually a fact. If we look throughout history, more people have died around the world from infectious diseases than from guns and bullets. If we take, for example, the mosquito-borne disease malaria, that has stalked and continue to do so, to stalk humanity for thousands of years. And over the last 20 years, at least 500,000 people around the world would have died from that. If we go further back to the plague of Justinian, which struck in the 6th century, that would have killed 50 million people. And at that time, that was about half the global population of the world. We go to the 14th century, the Black Death, that killed 200 million people thereabout. Smallpox killed about 300 million people until we had the vaccination, which was the world's first, in 1796. If you look at the influenza pandemic in 1918, that would have killed between 50 and 100 million people. And that's the flu. And if you look at HIV, that pandemic, that disease, we are still without a vaccine, and that has estimated to kill about 32 million people worldwide and infected another 75 million people, with more being added daily. What does this mean? It means quite clearly that COVID-19 will not be our last infectious disease that we will have to grapple with. Secondly, it means that we are at war. And I'm not just using the term war in a metaphoric sense, but we are literally in a war to save lives. And I have seen people, great and small. I've seen public servants like us, leaders like us. I've seen ministers of health around the world becoming infected with the virus. I've seen prime ministers become infected. And so we are in a war to save lives. For most of us, this is the second major pandemic that we have to treat with. Of course, HIV being a pandemic, as by the definition of the term pandemic. And so the motion asking us today to urge people to adhere more or less to the advice and the proddings and the pleadings and the beggings of the state, and I will add of healthcare professionals, to stay indoors, to avoid congregating, to ensure that you pay attention to the offerings of the state that can help you mitigate these difficult times. There has been information overload, literally. But still, we are here today to beg some more. I have a good friend who has been saying to me, and I'm inclined to agree with him, it makes no sense begging unreasonable people to be reasonable. And for how much longer are we going to urge unreasonable people to be reasonable? Some people are just not reasonable. What are some of those measures that people should pay attention to? The Secretary of Finance went through the economic provisions that the state is offering, both at the central government and at the THA level. I listened to the Minister of Finance this week, and I listened to his presentation and his request, which was acceded to by the Parliament, to allow him to go through the Heritage and Stabilization Fund to get some $1.1 billion as part of funding to treat with COVID-19. And to be honest, Madam Presiding Officer, when I first heard it, I thought, that's not the best idea. But I slept on it, as I often do many things. And I woke up this morning and I thought about it again, and I said, you know what? This virus, and in particular, we are facing a cocktail of crises that includes not just the virus, but the oil war brewing between Russia and Saudi Arabia. And so we have to use, in this time, a multiplicity of measures, of funding measures, to be able to treat with the economic fallout from this. For us in Tobago, We have businesses, many of whom were only now recovering from the Air and Sea Bridge collapse in 2017. We have many businesses that still have not recovered from the last global recession. We have businesses that have not done well for a long time simply because our tourism arrival rates have been dismal. And so in many instances, we have businesses in Tobago that perhaps are more at risk than some in Trinidad. In fact, we don't have businesses, private businesses, the size of some of those businesses in Trinidad. We don't have conglomerates, Tobago-owned, Tobago indigenous conglomerates here. We have quite a few in Trinidad, especially in the manufacturing industry, and some in banking, finance, and insurance. And so, as I thought more about the measures presented by the Minister of Finance during this week, I keep saying to myself, perhaps we have to do more. I did hear the Minister acknowledge that there are lending facilities at IMF and the World Bank that don't fall under the ambit of their regular structural programs, meaning if we access those funds, we're not under an IMF restructuring program. They are specific to treat with COVID-19. So he did speak about them, and I anticipate that he will, in addition to what we are taking out of the HSF, we will seek funding from some of these other institutions if there is a shortfall. Because in fact, when I look around the world and look at stimulus packages around the world, I am arriving at an opinion that most countries are looking to create a package that is around 10% of its GDP. Most. And if we are to create a package around 10% of our GDP, then it means that we are looking for at least double what we will get from the HSF, if that's what we need to look at in terms of what will be needed financially to treat with this. The truth is, most people and most economists can only suggest what might happen based on the trajectories that we are seeing. But the worst is not yet seen. And so we may wake up at the other end of this crisis and may discover that it is a lot more, that there's a lot more that we should be doing. And the countries that will survive will be the countries that are first out the gate and the countries that are best prepared as they exit the gate, this COVID-19 gate. We have to, in our deliberations on the economy, also consider a group of people who did not lose their jobs because of COVID-19, but would have lost employment just prior to COVID-19, and because of COVID-19 will find it difficult to find another job. Most of the grants and the funding I see really are related to those who are directly impacted by this. But we have a small but significant group of people who will be impacted. For example, the reforestation program, like the ones run under the central government. The one that, for example, Charlottesville had one. They had some closure or restructuring in their program, and so the workers in that program are no longer employed. But they can't find a job now during this crisis. They too must be considered as we are considering benefits for people affected by the virus. We also must pay attention, and Councillor Dr. Faith Israel mentioned it in passing, to the last warning sounded on the 25th of March by the head of WHO, General Tedros Adhanom, and he gave quite some pointed criticisms of countries in the world, not just Trinidad and Tobago, of countries in the world. In fact, he was saying governments should stop wasting precious time needed to fight the coronavirus after squandering an opportunity to prevent the COVID-19 pandemic. We squandered the first window of opportunity. He went as far, Madam Presiding Officer, as to giving us 6 actions that we should take. 1, he says that we should expand, train, and deploy healthcare workers. Councillor Dr. Faith B. Israel spoke to some of that. There is nothing wrong, and in fact, he's recommending it, that even in this crisis, we are training and retooling healthcare professionals to treat with this, especially lab techs. He said we must implement systems to find the suspected cases. And for that, he's talking about the need for testing. It's almost as if you could never do enough testing or too much testing, because it's the only way to find out our true numbers. Ramp up production of tests and increase availability. So he's also speaking to not just ramping up testing, but increasing the availability of testing equipment to other labs. Identify facilities that can be transformed into coronavirus health centers. Dr. Faith B. Israel, Councillor Faith B. Israel spoke to that as a suggestion, that we have to start thinking of, if a worst case scenario happens in Trinidad, what do we do? Develop plans to quarantine cases, and that we have been doing, and successfully at that, and that must be commended. We must refocus government on suppressing the virus. And I think we also have been only looking at the virus. That is all the government has been obsessed with. And even for us here in the THA. So some of that has been happening. But in other words, the head of WHO is saying that countries have to do a lot more. Countries like Singapore that were doing well and said, hey, we are out of this now, had to resume lockdowns because they were seeing cases re-emerging after they had successfully suppressed the numbers. And so we have to begin to look closely at these 6 actions that the WHO is recommending, and we should follow them closely. When we speak to urging members of the public to concede to the advice of the state, Madam Presiding Officer, we're really entering some tricky grounds. And I've seen a lot of posts on Facebook, and people say, well, people harden, they're not here, people this. But I've come to the conclusion, and maybe because they are my insurance providers, just like Tatil, people are people. We saw them at Miami Spring Break. We saw them before. Italy is at this apocalyptic state. We saw them breaking the curfews in Italy. We saw them all around the world doing the same thing that people do, being selfish. And so every day we have been having press conferences. The press conferences have been chunked or cut into bite sizes and placed on ministries' Facebook pages. We have seen e-posters develop with the speaking points from press conferences. Some e-posters are well done, some are not well done, but we won't discuss that. But if we had to urge people some more, perhaps we have to begin to look at how we communicate. We cannot assume that most people in the population sit and watch the press conferences. We can't assume that most people are like some of us. We can't go to bed without getting the nightly news or reading the daily paper. We can't assume that everyone has WhatsApp and can receive a WhatsApp e-poster. And so we have to use different methods. We have to diversify our communication strategies if we are to urge more people to accede to the wishes. We have to begin to perhaps consider jingles. Haven't we thought about that? Many in the cultural business are without an income at this time. It might be good to consider that. We need to consider how we reach people in rural areas, many of whom think, well, no traveler, no visitor coming here right now, so we safe, we isolated, we just be the last to get everything, so we might not get this at all. But we have to begin to reach people in a much more demanding manner. In fact, sometimes I wonder if we should go out on the streets and say to some of these people who have converted the front of supermarkets into rum shops and tell them to pelt the so-and-so and go home. Sometimes I wonder if that's the language that we have to use to communicate with some people so they will get it in their skulls, in their heads, that this is serious business. But we have to diversify our communication techniques even more. But one of the things that have been working that we seem to be afraid of is really locking down the place. And I have noticed that while we were here, and in hindsight, I think perhaps we should have had this sitting in the morning and allow people to watch the national press conference. But one of the things just announced is that as of Sunday night, all non-essential workers will have to stay home. I saw a press conference this week led by the Executive Council, and a member of the media asked a secretary about that issue, and the question was reposed to the media worker, who are those non-essential workers? Well, I guess we'll have to figure that out now and post haste, because tomorrow will be the last working day for a while for many category of workers. And I agree, and I support that. We have, on this side from day one, been advocating for a complete lockdown, because that has been the best practice around the world. Yes, there are economic impacts to that, but the reality is, unless we put the weight of the law behind this thing, some people will just never take advice. They will never take telling. And look, let us be honest, we have bucketers, people within our society, and it is not fair for the police to be driving up and down, running behind people to chase people home. That's not fair. We have to become even more drastic, more radical in how we approach the issue of a lockdown. Several suggestions were given by my colleague, and I will add some more suggestions. She spoke about surveillance testing and doing at least 300 to 350 of those. She also placed on record the suggestion of us having a plan B. She spoke about portable ventilators. She spoke about the issue of psychosocial care for healthcare workers, and that is critical. I heard the move of the motion thanking our frontline workers, but they will need care. And I will extend that beyond the healthcare workers, because right now, our supermarket workers, our pharmacy workers, those in pharmaceutical industry, they too have become part of the frontline care for our society. Some of the people that we ignore daily and sometimes we are impolite to have become the ones that have to save us in this crisis. The market vendors, our farmers. And these are people, while everyone else will have to shut down, we'll have to ensure that we eat and ensure that we can survive this. So they too should be considered for psychosocial care.
Remember, you have 10 more minutes of speaking.
Oh, sure, that's fine, Madam Presiding Officer. And I wish to not follow my colleague on the other side to ask for extra time. Right? I hope to not have to. We also need to consider setting up a permanent structure to deal with infectious diseases. And that's a big one, Madam Presiding Officer. That's a big one. You see, the United States had a permanent structure prior to Donald Trump, where they looked at, they had a committee, a working committee with professionals that looked specifically at pandemics and infectious diseases outside of the operations of the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. And of course, he shut it down. But now, with this pandemic, it is seen where it is needed. And given the history that I just recalled, it should be expected that it might be COVID-19 today, but down the road, we will have some next infectious disease to fight with. So we have to have a permanent structure in place. So when we're setting up for COVID-19, let's bear in mind that we're not just setting up just for now or just temporarily. We have to consider a permanent structure for the hereafter. We must all in this house also be equally responsible. So if we are saying, as of this weekend, no to non-essential workers, I don't know where we will fit in that spectrum, but we have to be responsible in how we treat with the public and how we engage the public during this period. We have to demonstrate the responsibility that we are asking of the public. And I want to end by saying two things. One, we have been through many things before, and I'm pretty confident we will get through this. And I indicated to the leader of government business during the week that we could have cancelled this sitting and a rep from my side come and a rep from the majority side come, and we stand down together, just address the public and urge them to adhere to the advice. Because, yes, we too are urging everyone else to adhere to the advice. Notwithstanding all the suggestions we have given, the suggestions don't mean, or the critiques don't mean that we are not in support of the advice given by the state. We are. And so, we are willing and we will accept the offer to work along with anybody, any team, anywhere, to treat with this issue. And the second point I want to raise at closing is that it shouldn't pass on us in this house and elsewhere that because of this virus, we cannot celebrate with the spiritual Baptist community the way we would have previously, in previous years. Unfortunately, ironically, they have to celebrate behind closed doors as they did prior to the removal of the 1917 prohibition, shelter prohibition. However, God is faithful. And so let us all join in with the spiritual Baptist community in not just recognizing the achievements of this democracy for religious liberty, but in also praying, in also asking God for his divine guidance. A lot of what we are calling luck, a lot of what has not met us as yet, is as a result of the mercies of God. Not our doing, but the sheer mercies of God. So we still have a reason to be thankful to God. And together we can fight this dreadful virus. And together, hopefully we'll be prepared for the next one, and the next one, and the one after that. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Madam Presiding Officer, for the opportunity to contribute to this very important motion. And of course, I will not be as long as any of the previous speakers. I'm going to be very short because I think most of what needed to be said was already said. And I take some of the recommendations made by the minority side with respect to Tobago's Plan B, and I'm sure the Secretary of Health will delve into some of that when she closes this debate. But I want to take the opportunity, Madam Presiding Officer, to congratulate our Tobago-born Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley. Because you see, it is easy to lead and it is easy to govern in good times. But of course, when challenges and crises come, that is when the mettle of a man is tested. And that is when the quality and capacity of leadership, Madam Presiding Officer, is truly tested. And as a Tobagonian, I am not only proud, but I'm also comforted that due to the leadership of the government led by him, that we are taking the right actions at the right time, and we are doing what is required from the government's perspective in dealing with this crisis, Madam Presiding Officer. I also want to congratulate, of course, the incoming Secretary of Health, Councillor Tracy Davidson Celestine, for hitting the ground running, of course, coming into the division at a difficult time in the midst of what all of us consider to be a crisis. And I think so far, the management of this process in the division has been exemplary, Madam Presiding Officer. And of course, the Secretary of Health before her, Councillor Dr. Carrington, who started the initial work and would have laid or prepared the ground for her to continue. I want to thank and congratulate her for her services to the people of Tobago. And of course, last but not least, our leader here in Tobago, the Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly, Honorable Kelvin Charles. But apart from the politicians, Madam Presiding Officer, because of course we are the face of the government, the Prime Minister is the face of the country, the Chief Secretary is the face of the THA here in Tobago. There are other individuals who we refer to as technocrats, or the technical persons who are the experts in this situation. And therefore, I want to congratulate the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Parasram, and of course his counterpart here in Tobago, Dr. Tiffany Hoyt, for the outstanding work and for the solid advice that they have rendered to both the central government in Trinidad and Tobago, and of course the Tobago House of Assembly here in Tobago. I want to thank and congratulate them sincerely as well. But make no mistake, Madam Presiding Officer, we are indeed experiencing challenging times. This COVID-19 pandemic has so far infected more than 500,000 individuals across the world. It has now spread to 175 or more countries by now, and it has caused death to over 23,000 persons, one of which is a citizen of this country, Madam Presiding Officer. In addition to that, this virus, this pandemic, has continued to shut down in some cases and completely obliterate sectors across economies throughout the world, Madam Presiding Officer. I've seen estimates where the losses thus far globally has exceeded $2 trillion US. And of course, right here in Tobago, I've heard reports of estimates of losses of some 88 million TT dollars that our tourism sector here in Tobago is expected to lose due to this crisis. And therefore, we must respond, and we must respond effectively, Madam Presiding Officer. And therefore, I want to spend approximately 15 to 20 minutes addressing three sectors of individuals, three sectors of people, who I would refer to as the three Ps. And that is public servants, the public, and the private sector, Madam Presiding Officer. And when we evaluate our situation here in Tobago, the numbers so far and the situation thus far suggests that approximately 5,000 to 6,000 Tobagonians are likely to be directly impacted by this crisis. And when I say impacted, I'm speaking specifically about lost jobs, lost income, loss of earnings, individuals who will suddenly find themselves unable to pay their rent, unable to pay their mortgages, and in some cases unable to eat. And therefore, the hope of those individuals, their ability to survive, and not only survive it, but survive this period with dignity, that hope heavily lies on the members or those that operate within the public service. And I'm going to speak specifically here to Tobago, Madam Presiding Officer. And I will take the opportunity now to respond or to speak about the social response in terms of social services that will be rendered to the people of Tobago in the midst of this crisis. And having given the number at approximately 5,000 to 6,000 persons, I'm hoping it will be less. The reality is that we in the Tobago House of Assembly, and specifically the Division of Health, Wellness and Family Development, more specifically that department with responsibility for social services, we ought to be prepared, Madam Presiding Officer. Because there was never a time in the life of the Tobago House of Assembly where the level of services or the number of persons requiring social assistance had been this high, Madam Presiding Officer. And therefore, the first thing that needs to happen is that we ought to evaluate our capacity and we ought to make quick decisions as to whether or not our present capacity, the number of social workers, the number of staff, the available finances will be sufficient to treat with the needs of those persons that are likely to be impacted by this crisis, Madam Presiding Officer. In addition to that, when we speak about the need for social distancing and all those requirements and all those actions that as individuals we must take to protect ourselves, that further exacerbates the situation with respect to staffing, Madam Presiding Officer. And therefore, it requires a certain level of efficiency. It requires us to be strategic in terms of how we prepare and in terms of how we plan to meet the needs of those that are likely to be impacted, Madam Presiding Officer. Apart from that, the other important thing is really the mindset of our public servants. And again, I want to reiterate that at no point in time in the history of the Tobago House of Assembly has the public service here in Tobago been challenged to this extent. And I'm saying over the next few days or weeks or months, the members of the public service, especially those with responsibility for delivering social services, will be called to a higher standard. And I'm saying in order for all of us to cope, in order for persons to survive this period again with a level of dignity, all of us must rise to the occasion. From the politicians around this horseshoe, to the social workers, those in the accounting units required to process documents and prepare checks, all of us, Madam Presiding Officer, will be called to a higher standard. And therefore, I want to take this opportunity to appeal to every single public servants across the Tobago House of Assembly, and even those who operate in Trinidad who might be looking on, to ensure that we are prepared, prepare ourselves mentally to operate in such a way that we can demonstrate the kind of empathy, the high level of customer service, so that we could render to the people of Tobago and the people of Trinidad and Tobago the level of service, the level of care and attention that will be required at this point in time. And of course, the public service is known for inefficiency. We are known for not being as effective as we should be. We are known for not being very urgent when it comes to our work. But I'm saying this crisis presents an opportunity for us to again rise to the challenge. So I'm appealing to all of us, all public servants, and all residents of Tobago by extension, to look out for each other. Give the kind of service that will be required. Show empathy to those that will be affected. Prepare a meal or two for those who might be in need, because I'm saying this crisis will affect all of us. And of course, the hope is that nobody in Tobago will be infected. But the reality is that most of us across Trinidad and Tobago will not be infected by this virus. But I can give you the assurance that all of us here in Tobago will be impacted indirectly. We may not lose our income, but we will know somebody, a family member, a friend, a neighbor, or some other individual that will be impacted, Madam Presiding Officer. Because the reality is that as we speak, businesses operating within the tourism sector have already begun to retrench. They have already begun to lay off staff as we speak. And based on the global situation, things are not likely to improve in the very near future. I also want to appeal, as I said, to the general public, the population, the residents of Tobago. This crisis presents an opportunity for us to show our best selves. It presents an opportunity as people of Tobago for us to rekindle those ideals, those values that Tobagonians of old were always known for. The values of integrity, the values of hard work, the values of looking out for each other, of care and concern, and being our brother's keeper. And I'm saying during this period, every single Tobagonian will be required to look out for every single brother or sister that live in this Tobago space. That is the only way, Madam Presiding Officer, that we will survive this difficult period and demonstrate the kind of resilience that Tobagonians and citizens of this country generally are known for, Madam Presiding Officer. So again, members of the public, of course, observe the requirements for social distancing. Wash your hands or sanitize your hands. And I want to congratulate some of those persons in the business community, because while the member for Palatovia, Lanzamis Speyside, spoke about those persons who we like to say stick rocking at the ears, there are some individuals, Madam Presiding Officer, that have understood the need for us to be cautious during this point in time. And I want to single out a couple of them, a couple establishments that I've gone to during this period between, I think it was the 12th of March when we had our first confirmed case to now. I've seen a number of establishments set up stations for persons to wash hands. I was greeted at the door of another establishment with hand sanitizers. Even in the Tobago House of Assembly, we are leading the way by putting the necessary systems in place to ensure that our people here in Tobago can follow the guidelines and, of course, maintain the safety standards. And therefore, I want to congratulate those individuals that are demonstrating the kind of personal leadership and responsibility that is required at this point in time, Madam Presiding Officer. And of course, finally, I want to appeal to those who operate in the private sector. That's the third P. Those in the business community. This crisis is an opportunity for you as well. It requires us to be innovative, and I want to tell a little story about, I wouldn't call the name, but a particular self-employed individual here in Tobago who reached out to me expressing her difficulty and the fact that the future looks bleak. And during the conversation, we spoke, and a number of suggestions were made, and I suggested to her, well, consider lower prices, consider other different marketing tools, consider putting the necessary systems in place so that people will feel safe coming to your business place. And I'm saying it requires every single business person in Tobago to demonstrate a higher level of innovation, to demonstrate a higher level of customer service in order to survive during this period. I even want to appeal to the bigger business, the not so small businesses, those who have the ability to weather this period without necessarily retrenching staff. I am asking and I'm appealing to them to consider that approach. Those who may be able to keep staff, maybe not at full salary, but maybe a reduction of 25% or 50%, to consider those measures as well. Because like the Secretary of Finance said when he echoed the sentiments of the Prime Minister, we all are in this together, Madam Presiding Officer. And therefore I'm saying to all of us in this room and all of us across this island, that if we are to come out on top, and if we are to defeat COVID-19, then we must summon our best selves from within. We in the Division of Health, Wellness, and Family Development, we are making the necessary preparations. It has been announced that we are prepared to assist every Tobagonian that finds themselves in difficulty during this period. We are prepared to offer food support in the form of food cards and also rental assistance for those who are unable to pay their rents. And of course, these are persons who are directly impacted by the recent COVID-19 developments. Of course, through the National Insurance Board, Tobagonians will also have access to the possibility of $1,500 per month as a salary replacement grant. And of course, the Secretary of Finance will very soon roll out opportunities for small businesses here in Tobago so that they can also access the necessary support that is required during this difficult period, Madam Presiding Officer. So I'm saying we are doing our work. We continue to make the necessary adjustments. We continue to formulate the necessary plans and strategies that will put the Tobago House of Assembly in the best position to respond to every single call of the people of Tobago for the critical assistance that will be needed at this point in time. So in closing, again, I want to appeal to every single Tobagonian. And let me go as far as appealing to every single citizen of this country that while we are going through a difficult period like the rest of the world, our survival does not only depend on the actions of government, but it also depends on the actions of every single individual in this country. So let us go out there and do our part. Let us give our best. And let us, of course, consider our own safety. But even while we consider our own safety, let's demonstrate the kind of selflessness that will also cause us to consider and respond to the unfortunate circumstances of others. I thank you.
Secretary for Health, Wellness and Family Development.
Thank you very much again for the opportunity to bring closure to this debate and, of course, to add to what has been said before in terms of further action to be undertaken by the Division of Health and Wellness and Family Development and also by the COVID Task Force. I want to indicate, Madam Presiding Officer, that we have been very timely and responsive in our approaches. And so you have heard from all of the speakers on this side, Assemblyman Joel Jack and also Assemblyman Ansel Dennis. And of course, they would have emphasized on respective areas in terms of their presentation. I also want to remind the House and Madam Presiding Officer that we also have a COVID response plan. And I am pleased to say that yesterday at our Executive Council meeting, the Division of Community Development and Labor would have also tabled a COVID response policy that will take effect throughout the Tobago House of Assembly. And I'm hoping that that plan would eventually become the policy for treating with emerging illnesses throughout the Tobago House of Assembly with respect to divisions. I want to add that because the situation is so fluid, because it is so nebulous, that we have considered all possibilities in our meetings. As the councillor would have indicated, she has only heard of a plan A, but we have been looking at different models, plan B, plan C, plan D, right down to plan E. What are the possibilities? What if we are not able to transport persons to Trinidad? What if there is an outbreak in Tobago? What if we have more than 50 persons, 100 persons being tested positive for COVID here on the island? And we have been looking at different facilities with a view to housing persons again who might be positive but well, and again, persons who may be positive but unwell. And Dr. Wheeler, Chief of Staff, was requested to submit a budget to that effect, the number of nurses that would be needed, the kind of equipment that we will need, and also the identification of a facility that will give support to that kind of situation if it ever occurs here in Tobago. One of the challenges that we face here is that we have only one hospital with 100 beds catering for all of us. In Trinidad, they have a bit more flexibility because they have hospitals throughout different areas of the island, of the country, and that is because of their relative size and also the size of the population as well. And so even in looking at facilities, we have considered places that are we have looked at places that may not necessarily be appropriate for the particular situation which we face, but facilities that we can outsource or outfit rather within the shortest possible time frame. So yes, we have been looking at the Moriah Health Center because that is a facility that is to come on stream very soon. But more importantly, we have looked at how we can reconfigure the hospital at Signal Hill in the event that we are to have an outbreak on this island. And so yes, in our planning, we have considered Plan B and right down to Plan E in the event that we are to have an outbreak on this island. We have also been undertaking self-isolation. We have also been undertaking contact tracing within the communities. As I would have indicated in one of my press releases, there are persons who are at home who have been in self-isolation for quite some time. And there are persons who would have come in very recently who are also in self-isolation. And those persons who are in self-isolation at this time are persons who would have come in from countries that are not classed as high-risk countries. The team, led by Dr. Hoyt, has worked very closely with the airlines, especially Caribbean Airlines, with a view to identifying those persons in the community, those persons who have come to Tobago through Piarco International Airport. And as we speak, they are out checking to ensure that they follow the self-isolation rules and regulations. And as we would have indicated, if persons are not following those rules and regulations with very random visits and, of course, with random calls, we will then pull them into a secured quarantine facility. While I was here paying attention to the debate, a lady indicated to me that the team would have come to her house, to her home, to check on one of the individuals that is supposed to be in self-isolation rather. Social support initiatives was highlighted by the Assemblyman, who is now the Assistant Secretary in the Division of Health, Wellness and Family Development, Assemblyman Ansel Dennis. And today, at our meeting, as we were preparing to come to this debate, we had discussions with the administrator and also the senior social worker with a view to ensuring that we can have even more support for the communities where psychological assistance and those particular areas are concerned. And we left the team at the office having meetings with a number of representatives in the family and wellness unit with a view to coming up with different strategies and different approaches to reaching out with respect to reaching out to persons in communities to provide them with that support. Dr. Wheeler would have indicated to me, very recently that there is a psychologist stationed at the hospital at this point in time, and for every nurse who would have interacted with any suspected COVID patient, there is a debriefing session as well. So the point I'm making, Madam Presiding Officer, is that most, if not all, of the recommendations and suggestions have been taken into our planning. On the issue of PPEs, as advised by the medical team, the COVID team, we have enough PPEs in stock. We have goggles, we have gears, we have gowns, there are masks, but most importantly, we have the appropriate stock in place. And if we happen to run out from stock, already we have held discussions with the Ministry of Health with a view to replenishing our stock within the shortest possible time frame. What we do not have at this moment is PPEs for every individual nurse or every individual doctor or every individual healthcare worker. The PPEs are given to persons who will come into direct contact, who will come into direct interface with any suspected COVID case. And so that is how the PPEs are administered at this point in time. We know that there are some fears within the health sector, but I have been talking to all the heads at our COVID task force meeting with a view to ensuring that there is constant communication with all of the nurses, with all of the frontline staff, so that they understand the particular situation, and so that they get ready information so that their fears can be allayed. Their fears and their concerns can be allayed as much as is possible. I want to add, Madam Presiding Officer, that the government and the Tobago House of Assembly, as I said, would have responded very timely, would have responded very readily to this particular situation. We have looked at it from a number of different perspectives, starting off with the closure of travel to countries that were considered high risk. That is one of the first plan that was implemented, and more later you would have seen a number of different plans, a number of different activities, a number of different programs being rolled out, not only by the government, but by the THA as well. Very recently, all of the borders would have been closed. And more recently as today, I have seen where the Prime Minister has announced that persons who are not performing essential services will be required to stay at home. The point I am making is that because the situation is so fluid, the plans, the programs, the activities changes very often. And the further point I am making is that the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and the Tobago House of Assembly are on top of this situation. We are responding to those who are vulnerable at this time. We have implemented a number of different social and otherwise programs. We have responded to the needs of the business sector, where we have held meetings with the banks, with the credit unions, and those things were expounded by the Assemblyman and Deputy Chief Secretary. And basically, we have looked at a comprehensive package of programs that will be rolled out over the next 3 to 6 months, as the case might be. But we are on top of the situation. Our health frontline people are all very ready. They are experienced, and they are willing to assist all of us in this fight. And as would have been indicated by all the other speakers, this is a time for all hands on deck. The systems can only work if each and every individual does what they are supposed to do. And so with those few words, Madam Presiding Officer, I take my seat, and I once again thank you for the opportunity to present this motion.
Members, the question put is, whereas the coronavirus, COVID-19, has been declared a global pandemic, and whereas the socio-economic impacts of the COVID-19 are far-reaching, and whereas a coordinated national response has been outlined by the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to contain the spread of COVID-19 and protect our citizens, And whereas the Tobago House of Assembly has also taken several steps and outlined specific guidelines meant to protect the interests of Tobagonians, be it resolved that this Honorable House urge Tobagonians to adhere to the actions and initiatives outlined by both the Government of Trinidad and Tobago and the Tobago House of Assembly. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it. The motion is carried. Leader of Assembly Business.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. And allow me to take this opportunity to extend greetings to the community of Shorter Baptist on the celebration of Shorter Baptist Liberation Day on Monday. At this time, Madam Presiding Officer, I beg to move that this House now stand adjourned to a date to be fixed.
Members, the question is that this House now stands adjourned to a date to be fixed. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned to a date to be fixed.
Good afternoon, Tobago. And it doesn't matter what time of day you are hearing this message. What's important is that you understand that we are facing down the barrel of a global crisis, and we are a part of it. We are affected as with the rest of the world. And so today we had a sitting at the house where we came together and collectively urged Tobagonians, even more than we have been doing, to ensure that we all follow all the protocols necessary to ensure that we remain safe. But you know, as we say in Tobago, all of we are one family. We are an island of small villages, but large families. And so in this period more than ever, what is quintessential to being Tobagonian is what will save us. That ability to take care of each other, that ability to look out for family, that ability to ensure that we could trust our neighbors and that we will not endanger our neighbors. And so the best way to do this, Tobago, is to ensure that we do just that we not be selfish, that we ensure that we stay at home if we don't need to be out, that we ensure that if we come into contact with anyone who traveled, that we self-quarantine, that if we traveled over the last couple of days or just before the closing of our air and seaports, that you are ensuring that you are buckling down at home and quarantining. And so let's do all we can. Wash our hands, observe best hygienic practices, practices that we were taught as children, so as to ensure that we don't spread this virus to friends and family. Because at the end of the day, we are all family, one family in Tobago. Let's protect the Tobago family. And once we do that, it doesn't matter what happens with the rest of the world, we will come out of this stronger. Together we can do this. And so I'm happy to join with my colleagues on the other side of the house in ensuring that we implore you to do what you can do and what you must do in ensuring that you keep yourself safe, your family safe, that you keep all of us safe. And while you're doing this, just enjoy the family time. Enjoy your children. Enjoy each other. Enjoy your spouse. Fathers, take the time out. Read a book. Sit down, observe nature, go gardening. But in all that you do, ensure you think about the family. Because at the end of the day, Tobago is an island with small villages, but large families. Thank you.
I have just moved a motion in the debating chamber at the Assembly Legislature calling for action from the Tobago public and also the Trinidad and Tobago public. Basically, the motion set out to outline the initiatives, the responses by the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as the Tobago House of Assembly. But more importantly, the motion is calling on all of us as individuals in your own spaces, individuals in workplaces, individuals in the communities to take responsive action, to be responsible in your approaches. We have seen where to date over 200,000 persons have contracted the COVID-19 virus. We have seen to date worldwide where over 23,000 persons have since died from the coronavirus. And as I would have indicated, never did I imagine that COVID-19 would have been a cause for concern for us in this region. But it is on our doorsteps, right here in Trinidad and Tobago. And while we as legislators will do our part, you as individuals have a role to play in ensuring that we flatten the curve as much as is possible. In the Division of Health, Wellness and Family Development, along with the Ministry of Health, we have been educating you, the members of the public. And every day we put out press releases. We have been inundating you with information on Facebook, on the social media, on Instagram. You yourselves have been paying close attention to what is happening in the world over. You have been researching, bringing yourselves up to date on COVID and how we can mitigate the spread as much as is possible. And so I want to just reinforce what you already know. That is to practice social distancing. That is to ensure that you wash your hands as much as is possible. Utilize water with soap. Sanitize where there might not be any water. And if it is, for instance, that there may be anyone in your household that is practicing or engaging in self-isolation, please ensure that that person, that individual sticks to the rules and regulations set out not only by the Ministry of Health, but also by the Tobago House of Assembly. Because we are in trying times, and your support as individuals, as families, as a community is very critical in this regard. Over the last weeks or so, the government and the Tobago House of Assembly have been working very hard. We have put several measures in place, and very, very recently, as today, the Prime Minister has said that we will close all non-essential services. It means that there is a concern, not only in Trinidad, but in Trinidad and Tobago. And so we have to act to suit. Stay indoors as much as is possible. Do not travel unless it is absolutely necessary. Yes, our borders will remain open, but we cannot afford to be complacent at this point in time. Let us all do this together. Let us work in harmony to flatten the curve of the coronavirus.